All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming in today. So I will go ahead and screen share and we will get started. So as we go through our presentation, if you have any questions, please just feel free to pop them in the chat box. And if we don't answer your questions as we go along, we'll definitely stop either along the way or get to them at the end. So we're here tonight to talk about finding the right fit, right? Finding that primary school and a little bit about what that admissions process might look like. So to introduce myself, my name is Rebecca Bush. I'm the primary head here at Baker & Bloom. I've been in the world of education for quite a while now in a number of different roles, and I joined Baker & Bloom about 2.5 years ago. I have 2 masters. My first is in elementary education with a focus on bilingual programs and that language acquisition process. And then my second is in advanced literacy. So I am a certified reading specialist as well as a dyslexia therapist. And my co-host tonight, Philo, if you can unmute, please.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Philo. Let's see, I've been here at Baker & Bloom for the last year, and I have been a teacher. I've been a kindergarten teacher for the last 15 years. I've been a classroom teacher, level coordinator, administrator, and curriculum developer as well. I have a master's in childhood studies and early years, which is my field of passion, actually. I'm also a certified teacher of English as a second language, which is very helpful. And I have a QKT from the Hong Kong University, so as a qualified kindergarten teacher. So that's me in a nutshell.
There we go. Okay, so that's our presenters tonight. So to let you know a little bit about ourselves here at Baker & Bloom. So we are an education center located here in Wan Chai, right on the Wan Chai Admiralty border. And everything we do revolves around this 4-leaf approach. So these are what we feel are the 4 key areas that our students need in order to really be successful students and then grow into successful adults. And our mission is all about creative literacy. So I like to define that as a flexible mindset that we can use to approach any problem and then have the skill set to think laterally around that problem and then have the ability to share our thoughts either in speaking or writing or coding or whatever area we're working in. In the primary, our keystone program is this, the Inspired Reader and Writer. It's a K-6 program, and it's really designed to be a one-stop shop for language skills, the conventions, speaking, listening, and of course those reading and writing skills and creative thinking. But we have other programs as well. We have creative writing, we do STEM, public speaking, as well as the more traditional academic ones of admissions, test prep, and of course academic coaching. And very exciting as well, we also are starting our own school. So Bloom Academy will be opening in September as well, which is very exciting. So now that you know a little bit about us and where we are, let's get started with our finding the right fit. That's our goal for tonight. So really what we're looking at doing tonight is giving you guys a bias-free overview of the different kinds of schools that are out there, the different kinds of curriculum, the different kinds of approaches, and then a little bit of a glimpse of an understanding of what that admissions process looks like and kind of what to expect in an interview. And as we go through, as I said, if you have any questions, please just pop them in the chat box and we'll address them either throughout the talk or at the end. So when we're talking about schools, we kind of want to think about these big questions, right? And that's what you want to have in the back of your mind when you're looking at schools. So let's start off by thinking about really finding that right fit, right? And who's your kid? There are so many schools out there, you know, and there are new ones opening up as well. So you really need to have a good idea of what you're looking for and what will be a right fit for your child. So some of the areas that you would want to consider, so first of all would be the languages. Are you looking for a bilingual program? And, or you focus more on English or French or whatever your language is that you are looking for? And also the really important piece is that level of literacy. So do you want them to be fully biliterate? Do you expect them to go to university back in mainland China or in Russia or wherever it is you're going? How high do you want that language ability to get? Or do you want it to just be more of a conversational, they can chat with, you know, the grandparents or family and go through their day? Also want to think about the culture. So every school is going to have a slightly different culture, and we'll get a little bit more into that as we get into different types of schools. But you want to think about what culture does your family have, and what are you looking for in a school? Is that going to be something that is a bit more on the traditional side? Are you looking for something that has more of a European feel or more of a Hong Kongese feel, depending on the culture that you're looking for? Of course, family expectations are really important. This is where you can talk to grandparents or aunts and uncles, what schools they've gone through, what they're expecting as well, to kind of keep in mind those big family expectations. Of course, if we're talking about siblings as well, you can think, well, if big brother is already at this one school, then I really want little brother to go there. Obviously, that makes sense logistically, but you also want to keep in mind what are the expectations for that child and how are they different than their siblings? Kind of the next area you want to think about, of course, is travel time, right? Particularly when we're talking about those earlier years or lower primary. Sometimes kids spend 3 hours a day on a bus to get to school. So you want to keep that in mind as well. And one of the big things to kind of think about, and not to say that you're going to plan out your child's future and everything they're ever going to do or everywhere they're ever going to go, but that kind of comes back to your family culture as well. Are you planning to stay in Hong Kong long term? Are you planning to move to Australia? Do you imagine that your child will most likely go to university in Europe or the UK? So you can kind of think in mind big picture long-term things, and of course that might change as your child grows and develops, but you can kind of think about what you're looking for, what those next steps are for them. The method of instruction, and this is a really big one, and this is where you want to make sure that you really understand who your child is. Do they need to really kind of get their hands dirty and do things and build things? Do they need to experience things to understand them? Then maybe a school that has more of a play-based approach or a project-based learning approach, maybe that would be a better fit. Do they really learn through stories and through different experiences and bringing everything together? Then maybe you're looking at more of a cross-curricular. Or do they really like to, they like to study, they need that academic challenge? So you want to think about the kinds of instruction that the schools are offering. And we'll talk a bit more about that later and what that would actually look like in the different schools. Of course, that holistic development, every kid is totally different, right? We have a lot of science, a lot of research that kind of shows us the general steps that kids are going to go through as they develop, but every child is different. So you want to keep that in mind. And also you want to think about what sort of supports might your child need as they grow and develop, and which schools might be able to offer that. Their birthday, right? Something as simple as their birthday can make a big difference, because for some schools, their cutoff might be January 1st, or some schools it might be August 1st. And so then you're looking at, well, are they going to be the oldest in the grade? Or are they going to be the youngest? So sometimes that can be a factor as well. And some schools can be a little flexible about the start dates, but some schools are also very, very strict as to when their birthday is and which grade level or year level that puts them in. And then that academic rigor piece as well, right? You want your kids, you want them to be challenged, and you want them to be excited about learning, you want them to be invigorated by it, but you also don't want them to be frustrated. So finding a school that's going to be able to offer that kind of sweet spot of being a kid and growing up and learning all of these things, but also being academically challenged. So really the big, the thing to keep in mind there is, who is your child? So to kind of go through all of those different categories and piece together what you envision, what your family envisions, and also just really reflect on who your kid is and what kind of environment might they need. So to transition a little bit into the different types of schools, so I'm going to just talk about kind of the big kinds of schools that we'll find in Hong Kong and give a few sort of a general description of what those types of schools might be like. You know, just like kids, every school is totally different. So just because it's two international schools, they very well could have different curriculums, different approaches, but to kind of give you the sort of buckets, you know, categories of schools that we'll find in Hong Kong. And so here's a really convenient table. For whatever reason, every country around the world likes to call call it the same thing, something different. I guess it, you know, lets them put their stamp on it. So it's really, you know, that's where you want to keep in mind, like, what is year one? How is that different than first grade or grade one? So typically that UK system, you're going to be a year behind. So going into year one, you're going to be 5 going on 6, versus going into first grade or grade 1, you're going to be 6 going on 7. So that's something to think about as well. If you're coming from a kindergarten that has a UK system and you're moving into an American system, you kind of got that gap year there in the middle between what might be called reception and what may be called first grade. So that's where you've got to think about how that transition will work. If you're moving from more of a UK into more of an HK, a Hong Kong, or of course a North American system. So as we go through the different categories, I'm going to first talk kind of generally about what those categories of schools are like, and then I'm going to give a few examples. Now, just to preface this, these examples, we are by no means saying that these are the best schools of that category or that they're the ones to look at. We are simply listing a few of the examples. And the ones that we chose them because these are schools that some of our students here at Baker and Bloom have come from. So those are the schools that you'll see up, but obviously there's way more out there. They're not ranked. It's not saying that these are the good ones and the others are bad ones. We're simply listing some of the examples from that school type. So to start off with international schools, that's one of the biggest, one of the big categories we have here in Hong Kong. It certainly is growing as well. Again, every school is going to be different, but generally what you're going to find in international schools is a foreign curriculum. So a curriculum from a different school. You're often going to find foreign teachers. So teachers who most likely are trained and certified from other countries coming in. Depending on the school, you might find a bit more of a sort of child-centered or hands-on approach. Again, that really depends on the kind of school. But generally that culture of the international schools is going to feel not necessarily of Hong Kong. It's going to feel more from whatever that country or those languages that international school has. So just to give a few examples, obviously this is just a handful of them. There's a lot of them out there. But yeah, international schools can be a good option, particularly if you're looking for that more of an international curriculum and more of an international type exposure and culture. Then, so still sort of in that broad category of international schools, you're going to have the ESF schools, so the English Schools Foundation. There's a bunch of them out there. They're going to be similar to international schools in that you're going to have a lot of international teachers, so coming from the UK or Australia, Canada, the US. It's going to have that same sort of feel as some international schools. The tuition can be a little bit less than some international schools, but the class sizes are bigger. One thing about ESF schools, though, is because it's such a huge network, they have a relatively good in-network support system, so learning support, for example. So just a couple of the examples, and these are just a few of the ones here on Hong Kong Island, but there's tons all over Hong Kong. So kind of that next category of schools, of course, are these bilingual schools. And I'm talking primarily about Chinese bilingual. Obviously there are other ones which we'll get to in a little bit when we talk about curriculum, but looking at those Chinese bilingual. And this is where you start to get quite a broad range of the kinds of approaches and the styles of the schools. But typically you're going to be finding where the Chinese and the English are generally kind of averaged out to be 50-50. And we'll talk more about dual language programs and what that actually means in a little bit. But you're going to be looking, most of these schools are going to be driving their kids towards not only bilingualism, but what we call biliterate. So biliterate, where they're going to be able the goal is to have them be reading and writing in both languages. Obviously, in order to do that, it requires a lot of time. Learning to read and write in one language can be tricky enough. And then when we start talking about two languages that have very different encoding systems, you're signing up to commit a fair bit of time to get to that biliterate level with both of them. One of the things to consider with some of these bilingual international schools, of course, is the characters, that traditional versus Chinese. And that really comes back to your family culture and kind of where you're looking long term as well. And that decision will have been made from the school, usually based on their school's culture, if they're coming from a particular country or if they have a certain outlook on the language or on the future. But they're typically going to be pretty academically rigorous. And that's basically because it just takes a lot of time to learn to read and write in two different languages. So just a couple of the examples that are out there of these international schools. Sorry, the bilingual international. And I put the international independent together. They are separate. So like, for example, the ISF Academy is an independent school, but that generally is just going to be a technicality in the licensing, not necessarily in how the school operates or how it's set up. And so the other category, of course, are the local schools, right? So the Hong Kong government schools. And these can be either Chinese medium or English medium. They're going to fall under the Hong Kong EDB, the Education Bureau's curriculum framework. So they're going to be teaching, the content from the government, or at least teaching something that's going to fall into those categories that the government has set out. It's going to depend on which one you go to, but a lot of them can be bilingual as well. So you're looking for a school that's very Hong Kong centric, very much rooted in where we live. Those local schools can be a good option. They tend to be, and this is kind of a big, broad, sweeping statement, but they tend to be more on the sort of traditional approach to teaching. A lot more of the rote memorization, the practicing, and a lot of that comes down to the fact that, again, they're working towards that biliteracy. And particularly when you're talking about learning traditional characters, it just takes a lot of time to master those. So these are just a couple of the examples that are out there. Again, these are not to say that these are the best ones. These are just ones that we've had students come to us here at Baker and Bloom from. So the last sort of category of schools that we're going to touch on before we move into curriculum are some of these network schools. And really what those are schools that belong to a global network of schools. So some of them might be that they had certain requirements to join the network. Some of them they've essentially taken, or they're trying to take a copy of the school, the original school from whatever host country they're coming from, and move that here. A lot of these network schools are on the newer side, but some of the benefits are that because they have that original school, you have that culture and you have everything that sort of carries over from those original schools. So just a few examples of the network schools we have here in Hong Kong. And then, so transitioning into the different types of curriculums and approaches. So now we've talked about kind of the general types of schools you're going to find. So international schools, the bilingual schools, local schools, network schools, ESF schools, which are very similar to international schools. And now we're going to transition into the curriculums and approaches. So this is more of what's actually happening in the classroom and what those standards and objectives are going to be that are being delivered across the grade levels. So the first kind of curriculum that we'll talk about are curriculums from specific countries. So these are designed to essentially be a school from the host country that has been more or less kind of picked up and moved here. So the curriculum is going to be from that host country. A lot of times the materials, the assessments, the teachers. With some of them, you might have part of the entrance requirement might be a passport requirement, that you have to have a passport from that particular country. It just kind of depends, but generally these really feel like a school from the country that they've come from. So just a few examples. So now actually these top two, the German Swiss International School and French International School, they're actually, each school has two different streams. So they're going to have that French or the German stream. And those are going to be basically a school from that host country. The textbooks, the teachers, the language of instruction, the curriculum, everything is going to be from that host country. But then running alongside that, you've got the English medium international stream. Of course, when we talk about country-based curriculums, right, we get a lot of questions about this US versus UK. Aside from the spelling differences, to be perfectly honest, they're pretty much the same when we're talking about primary. We know what's happening in first grade versus year 2, it's going to be pretty similar. Of course, you have to remember there is that age difference. So year 1 in the UK system is going to be kindergarten in the US system. So you'll see that little bit of a difference, but aside from that, they're pretty much the same. The US curriculum tends to be, versus the UK national curriculum, the US Common Core, it's a little bit more skills-based than just knowledge-based, but it's going to have a lot of that knowledge piece in there as well. And the US Common Core, it is only literacy and numeracy, whereas the UK national curriculum has more pieces within it. And then, of course, in those kindergarten years, you're going to have the early years foundational skills, which then carries on into the UK national curriculum, Key Stage 1, 2, and then on from there. So just some examples of the schools we have here in Hong Kong that follow that UK system versus a US standard US curriculum. So to move on to bilingual programs, I know we get a lot of questions about that here. What are the different types of bilingual programs? What does it actually mean when they say they're dual language? So we'll kind of go through some of the terms and just let you know a little bit about what they look like, what that actually means. And then you as parents can kind of think, it's really is always that question of what are my target languages and to what level do I hope my kids to achieve in that language? So there are dual language programs. So that really just means that they are teaching reading and writing in 2 languages. So they're driving towards that biliterate piece. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that every kid can achieve that, but that's the goal of the program, is moving towards that biliteracy. So they're able to read and write in 2 languages. One of the types that we see is immersion. So that's where essentially, so what's called the partner language or the target language, that kids as early as possible is immersed in that language. So that means that most or all of the day will be held in that target language. And now it can be full or partial. So, and that's where we start to talk about those percentages, right? So if I talk about 100% Chinese medium instruction, that means that the entire day, everything they do throughout the day is going to be in Chinese, which for most of the students we have here is going to be that target or partner language. Usually what we see though is a gradual transition from more 80-20 to 70-30, and then kind of moving your way up. A good immersion program and a good transition is going to really look very, very carefully at the developmental continuum of the language acquisition process, and also look at what's happening within the brain during different parts of those ages and stages, so that the program can maximize the instruction in one or the other language, basically based on what the kids' brains are ready for. So that's one of the things you want to look for when you're looking at that percentages. Yeah, so percentages. You can also have, you'll have 2 kinds of dual language programs. So one is a 2-way, which we actually don't really see here in Hong Kong. And that's because, particularly if the partner language is Mandarin, we don't really have a significant chunk of students who are native mother tongue speakers of Mandarin. But a 2-way dual language program means that half the kids are native speakers of the one language, half the kids are native speakers of the other language, and they kind of teach each other along the way. And you never want to have more than about 2/3 of the school, of the class, be one or the other. That's 2-way, and then 1-way or foreign language is where pretty much for the majority of your kids, that partner language or that target language is going to be a not their native tongue, not their mother tongue. And then when we talk about bilingual programs too, again, kind of looking long term, you're thinking about, are we transitioning? So are we going from 80-20 in year 1 to actually flipping that to 20-80 in year 12? Or are we maintaining it? Are we working our way up to about 50-50 and maintaining that all the way through? And again, that's going to come back to your goals of what level of academic proficiency are you hoping your child to achieve? So when we talk about academic achievement, an academic level of language, that can take minimum 7 years to achieve. So if you really want your child to go to university in that target or partner language, you're going to be looking for a maintenance type program pretty much all the way through. And then, of course, we have foreign language programs. So those are what you're going to see in some of the international schools, where that second or that additional language is being taught a number of classes a week, but not really in any sort of immersive, intense way, but just in a few hours a week, kind of more exposure way. And with the dual language programs, obviously most of the ones we see here in Hong Kong are Chinese medium, but you've got French and German. There's a range of them as well. One of the other types of programs we'll talk about, and you see a lot here in Hong Kong, is the PYP. So this comes from the International Baccalaureate. It is basically their primary years program, right? So it's designed to be with the little guys that then segues into the middle years, which then segues into that IB program in secondary. It's generally, the curriculum is a little bit more UK based as far as spelling and standards, but the way that they go through things is much more based on inquiry and hands-on learning, and kind of bringing in that cross-curricular piece. And then just to talk a little bit about approaches. So particularly when we're talking about primary schools, we see a lot of these different kinds of schools popping up. So for example, Montessori, right? So there's the International Montessori School. So Montessori comes from someone whose name was Montessori, who came up with this idea of how kids should learn. So Montessori schools are going to be much more student directed. So the kids kind of follow their passions. Typically the classes are going to be more mixed age. So you might have some first and second graders kind of all together. And then the teachers are really there more as guides. So if you're looking for that kind of experience, it can be, really beneficial. I will say one of the detriments of Montessori though is that because it's so student directed, you miss some of those foundational skills, so grammar and spelling, that kind of stuff. You'll have Waldorf, which is similar to Montessori. And it's going to be, again, very student directed and a lot more sort of based around projects and themes and bringing in that student piece. And also a fair bit of sort of character education. And some Waldorf schools have a bit of a Christian slant to their character education, just depends on the school itself. Dalton, again, very similar. So all of these came from people who had that name. Dalton schools are going to be a little bit more on a balance of the kind of teacher-directed, so kind of learning, what's happening in that grade level, what the standards are, and then the student-directed projects. So the cross-curricular piece is going to be more about the student's interest, but you'll still kind of have that little bit more of the traditional literacy and numeracy. But a lot of these and other international schools as well, you're going to see project-based learning, which basically means that you have been learning the science and the math or the reading and writing, and then you're actually going to go do something with it. So typically you're going to get a problem that you will then work your way through to address. So that's kind of where that's a little bit of an overview on the kinds of schools and the kinds of curriculums. So we're going to switch gears now, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that interview process might look like. So we're going to be talking mostly about the kind of early years of primary, because that's where most of our parents are. And this is just an overview. Of course, every school is a little bit different, but just to give you guys kind of a glimpse of what it might look like. And I will pass it over to Philo.
Oops.
what do schools look for? Well, that's a big question, isn't it? Well, first and foremost, they do look for personality. Um, no two children are alike. And if you have a child who is a free spirit versus a child who's a bit of a dreamer, they do meld together. So first and foremost, let me assure you that if your child falls into either one or even a different characteristic altogether, personality altogether, they are unique. Every child is unique. And the next thing that schools actually look for would be their communication skills. Would their child be able to complete their sentences with diction? Do they clearly articulate their thoughts? And are they courteous to adults and their peers? Now, these are very important skills that would be useful to them lifelong. They would definitely be looking at interactive skills with a group of peers. Can they hold a conversation using extended sentences? Would they be taking an interest, curiosity in whatever is going around them? And would they be able to take direction and respond when they are spoken to? One of the things I'm sure you would have heard over the years would be sharing is caring. But now that, we're looking at the impact of COVID, where children have not been in school for months on end, this is something that we have to slowly introduce, or rather introduce the idea that they have to share and take turns. This is how they would be looking at their cooperative skills. Oh, sorry, I was just told, I forgot that. All right. Next of all, as you can see here, this is basically one of the things that they would be observing. How does your child interact with another child? Would they be able to get along? So it would be advisable perhaps to introduce them back to going back to school, and how these skills are very important. Next, please. What are some possible questions? Okay, now I know there was a question that said, someone had asked a question, what is the point of interview questions if some schools do not basically value interview sessions? But your questions basically would be categorized as, first and foremost, the child's kindergarten school life. Yes, we are looking at pre-COVID, and some of the things they would ask a child would be questions along the lines of, what is your favorite subject? And hopefully they remember to say, what was your favorite subject? What were some of your favorite activities? What did you like the best about your school? And they would like to get to know your child as a person. And sometimes these questions are just to get a feel. Next would be some idea of a primary school life. I did notice there was a question somebody had asked about how is it possible to get an idea of what the primary school would be like if there are no on-site visits. Brilliant question. And I would recommend, have a look at their websites. Have a look at their websites. Look at what your child is interested in. Perhaps if they're going to a school where there's a swimming team, or there is an orchestra, or something along the lines that your child is interested in, go on to the website, have a look, because one of the questions some schools would ask is, what do you know about us? What do you hope to achieve with us? So it would be good to take the time to check out the website, and I would say not in one sitting, but just to familiarize with the school. And another category would also be about family life. A typical question would be, what do you and your family like to do together on a weekend? Um, I've asked this several times, and very often children go, I don't know. Um, One of the reasons behind this particular category is, of course, to sort of understand the involvement in the child's life. Um, a good way of sort of instilling that would be to start talking about what you have done as a family, the activities that you've done as a family, perhaps at the dinner table, or perhaps before your child falls asleep as you cuddle them in bed. Sort of go over, ever so naturally as well, and let that be a reminder, because this is how they would be asked questions, and this is a good way for the children to remember as well. And last but not least, they would be asked questions along the lines of their hobbies, habits. Um, there was a young man who corrected me when I asked him, what sports do you play? And he actually said to me, we don't play any sports, Miss Phil, because it's now COVID and nothing, we haven't gone back to normal activities yet. So I had to correct myself and to say pre-COVID. And some schools, you would have some schools who are very interested in your child's musical background or their artistic background. And definitely international schools would be interested in the creativity of your child. So it's very important that you do bring these things up and remind the children some of the things that they had done, and to keep that interest going as well. Next, please. And whatever you do, please be authentic. The schools, they look for that. They're not looking for the perfect child. What they're looking for is a real person who has strengths and, of course, areas to be strengthened upon. So be authentic and practice good volume and tone. One of the good things would be to teach them to sit up straight, because your volumes starts from your abdomen, your tummy, and facial expression. A picture says 1,000 words. So having a look at this young man, I wonder what he's thinking. So body language, facial expression, volume, and tone. Next, please. Schools also look for your child's social emotional skills. And I would also have to stress that schools do understand that children can be shy. They're not looking, again, for the perfect child, but for a child who is able to verbalize their emotions, a child who is able to socialize with others. So they would understand that pre-COVID, perhaps they had play dates, and now that's something that over time that they would have to get used to. And the child also would have to understand and follow simple instructions. It could be as simple as something that's silly, stand on one foot and touch your toe, or anything, but it's how quickly or how is the child able to comprehend and follow. Next, please. And of course, independence. Independence as to would they be able to carry out activities on their own. Now would be a good time to sort of get the children to pack their own school bags if they're going back to school. Give them a sense of independence when it comes to picking out their clothes if they're not wearing uniform. And these are little skills, but then they are crucial in an interview. Next, please. Aha, I wonder where I'm going with this. All right. Let's have a look at what this would actually mean. Miss Bush, thank you. Fine motor skills. Fine motor skills could be anything from cutting, gluing, writing, and these are very important, especially in the early years. So it would be great if you could practice these at home, not to make it regimental, but give the child the feel of scissors, give the child the feel of glue stick and how they hold their pencil grip. That is also key. Next, please. As I said, writing. Writing formation. You might wonder, well, my child is very young, but is not able to write. That is fine. What they're looking for in some schools, I would have to though emphasize, some schools they would ask questions along the lines of writing at their full name. The child would be expected to write their full name. They would be sort of expected to write how old they are. I'm not going to tell you my age, X number of years old, and I am a girl or I am a boy. So the pencil grip, that is important as well. Next, please. And naturally, especially in international schools, it's the creativity. How is your child able to respond? You might open up the art room and watch, observe your child. What are they creating? How do they go with the flow? So this is all part of something that carries on lifelong. Next, please. Literacy. Literacy starts off with language skills. And is their oral language close enough to what they need in order to access the curriculum? Let's have a look at the components of literacy. Letter names and sound correspondence. Yes, phonics are a big thing in Hong Kong, but it's beyond that as well. Is the child able to print? Is he able to recognize the printed letters of the alphabet and name them as well as sound them? Next, please. And emerging reading skills. Emerging reading skills would be as simple as a child being able to decode a short word. Could be cat, but as long as you're able to decode cat, it shows the child's emerging reading skills. And this is something that I think at home, it would be great if it's the role modeling. You could ask your child to retell a story, or as you read along, they sort of pick up your interest in reading. And with the letter names and sound that correspond, it's all laying down the foundation towards a strong reading foundation. Now, story retelling, that is also important. A teacher might read a book, might tell them a story, and story retelling would usually cover the 5 W's and sometimes the age: who, what, where, when, why. So if you are having, if you're reading a story at bedtime or even with your child as you're relaxing, it's always easy to ask questions, because then it becomes second nature to them to immediately click on to who, what, where, when, why, and also how. Next, please. Yes. Why is Miss Philo showing us such a bizarre picture? I wonder. One of the things that some schools would be looking for would be visual discrimination, and to be able to compare, contrast, and to be able to, and they would also look at their reasoning skills. These are things that are important, because yes, it looks odd, But what is odd about this picture? What can you say about it? Yes, the lady should be walking two dogs. Why is she walking a tiger? Surely she should be flying a kite. What's a bathtub doing there? And it's that sort of reasoning skills that they would look for. Next, please. As I said, vocabulary and reasoning skills, very crucial, very important. So ask your children lots of questions. It does not have to be so regimented. You could ask questions even as you go out for a walk. Have a look outside and say, well, why do you think that is happening? What could be done instead of this? And these are ways where you're preparing them, and make sure that they do speak in full sentences and they do articulate. One of the reasons what you're doing here is building up their confidence, because your child might be shy, but he or she, when they warm up, they're able to speak with confidence. So all of this, it builds them up to be confident speakers, readers, and writers. Next, please. Numeracy. Aha, I wonder what that means. Let's have a look. Oh, isn't that delightful? A heart made out of numbers. Well, let's see what you would be asked. Rote counting. It's counting. In some schools, it's 1 to 10, and other schools, it would be 1 to 20. Is your child able to count from the beginning to the end? They would also be asked, next please. From number recognition and correspondences, this is the recognizing the number and the quantity of it. So if this becomes a sort of a habit as you walk down the street or as you walk from your apartment block as well, you could sort of point out the numbers and make a game out of it. Because the next point, as we come to it, it helps them with the counting forwards, backwards, and skip counting in 2s, 5s, and 10s. You might say skip counting in 2s. It's a hard thing to do, yes, but if you have a paved pathway, if you don't mind, you could skip alongside your child and teach them as they skip 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And it's slowly, it's the mind and how they remember these things. Next, please. Shapes. Not only would they be, oops, back to shapes. Shapes, not only would they be looking at your child's knowledge of 2D shapes, but also 3D shapes. So it's always good to sort of revise how many sides does a 2D shape have, how many sides does a 3D shape have. And some of that would be, okay, a 2D square, when it's a 3D, it becomes a cube. So try to shift it instead of going a 3D square is a cube. So make it as hands-on as much as possible so that they remember, it's in the memory. Next, please. Right, sequencing and how to make a pancake. You'd probably have about 4 to 6 pictures, and they would be pictures that a child, they're sort of sequencing what comes next, steps, instructions, and it would also be looking into their logical thinking, because naturally you'd have to get the milk first, and then you'd have to get the eggs, then the butter, then the jam. Oh, let's not forget the flour before we make our pancake batter. Next, please. portfolios. Now, this is a big question in some of the local schools, but however, extracurricular activities, these are what your child is passionate about. And if you have a concern that, you know, schools are not back fully on yet, what do we do? Well, I would simply say, have a look at the, may I have the next point, please? Share copies, photos or video clips of any activity that your child is passionate about. Remember, this is all about your child, and this is about who they are and their personality. So let them have their own voice and let that be what comes through. Next, please. Oh, did I skip my little drummer girl? There we go. What your child is passionate about. If your child is passionate about playing in a band, or let her drum away to her own tune, that is fine too, because that shows leadership skills, I think. Moving on. Thank you. Tips. Take a deep breath. Please understand that the more stressed you are, your children pick it up. They in turn become stressed. They in turn become anxious. They in turn become nervous. And I would like you to remember that no two children are the same. So while the elder sibling might perform differently in a different area, there's no requirement for the younger to do. There's no comparison between the sun and moon, because they will shine when it's their time. And remember, variety is the spice of life. Thank you. And most importantly, what are you hoping for your child? Ms. Bush did go through all the different schools, but what are you hoping for your child? What are you hoping that the school that you would like your child to enter, is that school going to inspire your child? Would it raise their interest in what they're doing? Would it engage them, you know, invite them to explore, to dig deeper? And would it foster their natural talents and abilities? And to talk about foster natural talents and abilities, I have a very quick story to share. I have a young man who is very shy, and it took him 5 weeks before he would speak, but his natural talent was that, and he's only now in K3 going on to grade 1. He loves animals, and they're not the usual kind of animals. He likes reptiles, iguanas, geckos, mud slippers. I didn't know what a mud slipper was till he told me. So what would this school do if your child is interested in things that are out of the norm? Perhaps, if you want to call that, would they foster it? Will they bring it forth? Next, please. And most importantly, we've gone through this period with COVID and all of that. Would it develop a growth mindset? Are we going to, would it give your child the courage to have that mindset that is not beaten, that mindset that says, you know, going forward, to look forward to something else? And we need the growth mindset as a community as well. And how would that school, you know, bring about, embrace that? That is crucial. You know, if we talk about the future leaders, this is what we need them to understand, to learn. Next, please. And with the school, engage in holistic and cross-curricular learning experiences. Is it purely in, are they purely interested in academic scores and assessments, or are they interested in building this child, this person, in a holistic manner, that the child has this full 360 chance of learning experiences. Next, please. Any questions?
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Ms. Philo. That was wonderful to get a little bit of an idea of what the interview process will look like, you know, and kind of those big categories that schools will be looking for. So if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute and ask, or pop them in the chat. And if you have any follow-up questions, please be in touch. But just some of the things now that you have an idea of, you know, the kinds of schools that are out there, kinds of curriculums, what they're looking for. So some of the ways that we here at Baker and Bloom can help. So on the student side, we do diagnostic screeners and assessments. So if you're kind of wondering like, well, I don't know, you know, about where my kid is this normal for that age? I would like, you know, for her to go to this kind of a school. What should I be working on? We could definitely meet your child, meet you, kind of ask a little bit of that. The one-on-one coaching and interview prep. So we, as you know, Philo said, we don't want that stock answer, but what we do through our interview prep is it really is more of a drama type approach. So we're just building their confidence, building their language skills, and getting them to where they're really happy to just walk in and talk to a stranger and answer questions and all that kind of stuff, that's really what the schools are going to be looking for. If you have specific questions about different specific schools or curriculums, we also do a lot of admissions consulting for parents. We also have a whole range of classes across primary and secondary. So these are the kinds of classes that we're offering on the primary. So we have that one-on-one or the private courses. Of course, we have that inspired reader and writer, as well as writing, math, STEM, and Chinese. As I mentioned at the beginning, we also are building our own school. So it will be opening in September of this next year, which is very exciting. And if you're interested in finding out more, please join us at our information session. It'll be this coming Tuesday, the same time, so a week from today. And you can RSVP at our website here. And also, please feel free to call us or email if you have any questions, or if tomorrow morning you're thinking, you know what, quite understand that, please reach out. We're always happy to help. And of course, you can follow us on social media as well. And we will be launching our new social media campaign in the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for that. But thank you all so much for tuning in on this Tuesday evening. It was really wonderful to hear everything from Ms. Philo and to share with you guys. And thank you so much. And we hope to see you and your children here at Baker and Bloom soon.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.